Thanks. All right. Good morning. All right. My voice sounds terrible, but I feel great. So back to living in Kentucky, right? I'm Sam. Hello. I'm a freelance software engineer living in Kentucky. Here's some of the stuff I've worked on. So there's the stuff. All right. So genius is the theme for this month. And I kind of really hate this idea of genius. So I'm not doing that. Because I think genius implies that someone is just inherently better at something than you could ever be. And I think that's nonsense. If you think of like a really gifted musician, you're watching them play like this amazing song or whatever. You're like, oh, I could never do that, which is crazy because you absolutely can. You could go buy a guitar at a pawn shop today and watch some YouTube videos and go home and all right, I can sort of play guitar in a couple of hours, and many years of practice you could become this person. They're not just this unattainable thing. You could do that. So I believe that you can do anything with enough time and effort. So that's what we're going to talk about. And kind of in the lens of my story, hopefully that's somewhat interesting. In the past, becoming a software engineer, this could obviously apply to design or whatever, but we'll talk about the thing I do. So let's go back a bit. I promise we're not going to go year by year from 1999. But in 1999, I was 10 years old, and it was a very different world. This is Apple.com. We didn't have cell phones really, or broadband, and it was it was a long time ago, right? People printed out MapQuest to go places. It was so imagine that. It was just crazy. So I learned HTML, or started learning HTML that year as a 10-year-old, which is weird. Our local internet service provider, back when that was a thing, had this free class on how to learn HTML. And I was like, sure, my mom wanted to go, and I went. And it was across the street from this terrible smelling meat facility downtown somewhere. I just remember it smelled awful. We parked on the street, went up this elevator. There's a guy in a small room with a projector, here's how you do HTML. And I went home and played a notepad and typed and made a thing, and this is pretty cool. 10 years old, I didn't know what I was doing, but we'll skip ahead a bit. So 2007, I graduated high school. Didn't ever really get good grades. We weren't really that wealthy, or not at all. And okay, what am I gonna do with my life? I don't know. I went to this event though from Apple. I was just a big Apple fan, and who's not, right? And they were showing off all the new technology for developers in macOS 10 Leopard, which to me was this fascinating, just to be near people that work at Apple was this cool thing. So I drove to Atlanta to attend this event, and just seeing all the stuff that they were showing, the new version of Xcode and Objective-C and all this stuff, I was this is amazing. Thinking about making a piece of software that runs on a Mac was just this unattainable. I could never make something like that. I can play a notepad and make some crappy web pages, but I can't make real software. So I bought this book after kind of being inspired at this event, and from this book I learned the basics of programming and made a thing over the summer. Made a little app that would put a countdown timer on a video, so if an event's about to start, you could. Stupid app. Anyway, we sold it and it did okay. I mean, a couple $100, which for me as a 18-year-old was this is fantastic. I typed and made money. This is great. I want to keep doing this. So that next year, I moved to Oklahoma City to work at this church, which is kind of a weird progression as a software engineer. But this church, Life Church, was hiring software engineers, and a friend of a friend knew some people, and I moved as an 18-year-old to go write PHP full time at this church, which is a pretty weird thing. And while I was there, the iPhone SDK was announced. Now it's called iOS, of course, but it's well, I kind of know how to do this since I know Mac stuff. So let's make an app. I don't know, maybe we'll make something that'll find church times. I don't know. I'm no, let's make the Bible. And I was sure, whatever. I was just excited to make something. So I worked on it in my free time at work, because this was a little side project. Then I worked on it for 3 months on and off, and then like 4 weeks full time. And we launched a thing that came out the first day of the App Store, and that was pretty cool. People seemed to be into it. I remember it was like the Thursday before 4th of July it came out, and then I was at like a cookout for 4th of July that Sunday, and I looked at my phone and it had passed 19,000 downloads, which was like 1,000 per year I'd been alive. I was like, that's pretty cool. I mean, obviously now it's like 500 million or something. It's kind of taken off. But for a church, it's like pretty insane to reach that many people, like with just one guy working on it in his free time. But when I started this project, I didn't know anything. Like no one knew iOS at the time, right? It was like a brand new thing. But I was like, I guess I can figure it out. And I never like didn't know what JSON was or APIs really or any of that sort of stuff. And I figured that out and made a thing. It was terrible. All of the software I've talked about so far is just the worst. But you know, you gotta start somewhere. So anyway, made this thing, and from there, look, other people worked on it for many years. But there's that. So 2009, I moved to Texas and started freelancing. I worked at a small company that was freelancing, like for other people, and then did it my own, which was amazing for me because at this time, it was probably like a year and a half in from iOS being a thing you could make apps for, and I'd already worked on like 10 plus apps, which is like pretty rare, I think, at the time. So I had a lot of experience doing a lot of different things, but all of those projects I started, like, hey, I need an app to map oil rigs that move. Did you know oil rigs can walk? I had no idea. They like move them, it's crazy. Anyway, so I made this thing to like map oil rigs and all this stuff, and it's Texas, right, it's oil. Not knowing anything about maps or like any of this, right? This was all like, I didn't know what I was doing at all by any means. But through all of that, I released this piece of software called SS Toolkit. It was pretty common to use like your initials and then like Toolkit. And I was like, oh, SS is like a boat. And I was like, anyway. So I like hired someone to draw that boat for me. It was like so stupid. Anyway, it was just a collection of all the stuff I had made that was reusable between all those projects, and there was a lot of different little random things, like stuff I'd written even in Bible, my first app, and then like the second and third and so on. You know, like if you want to put a spinner next to a label and you want to reuse that as like one unit, like just silly stuff like that, to show like a grid of things. Anyway, that actually was like a pretty pivotal moment for me. I didn't know anything about open source or maintaining like a library people would use. But it turns out that a lot of people were really into it because no one else had like worked on this, you know, wide range of things. So like Facebook was using it for a bit, and Pinterest and Apple and a bunch of people used this software, which is pretty cool, and I got a lot of like notoriety through that. So there's that, I guess. We're getting to a point, I promise. So in 2010, I moved to San Francisco. My client in Texas, it was like, hey, you gotta move to San Francisco, everyone's there. Like, that's where all the meetups are and stuff. And I was like, sure, like, I haven't known anyone in Oklahoma or Texas, like, let's keep it going. Next year, new city, no one. And I moved to San Francisco. I quickly started working at this company called Hipstamatic. They had found me through that open source stuff. They were using it and like emailed me, had some questions. I had lunch, and I was like, hey, you should come work here. I was like, sure, I'll come work here. Sounds cool. I've heard of this. I hadn't heard of the startup I was working on at the time, so I was like, sure, let's do it. And there I was like leading a team and you know, working on image processing stuff, like nothing I knew anything about. But during all of this, I just started and assumed I could figure it out. Even like my very first project here in Louisville as like a high schooler, it was like this video, it was like a YouTube ripoff basically. And I was like, man, I don't know anything about video. Like, how am I supposed to do this? And I just like, I'll figure it out. And sort of figured it out. But anyway, I want to talk about how to start a new skill, specifically software engineering as an example, from scratch, and how to like be proficient in it with not that much time to start, and then go from there. So I like this analogy of a guitar, thinking of like you're watching someone play this like amazing solo or something, and it's like, I could never do that. They're like this genius that's like musically gifted and I could never do that. But I guarantee you, if you like leave here, go buy a crappy guitar for 50 bucks at a pawn shop, and go home and watch some YouTube videos for 3 hours, you could absolutely like play a song tonight. Like that's absolutely achievable. And hopefully that's like sort of, you can kind of imagine that like I could see myself watching some YouTube videos and like, how do I, okay, you know, like you can kind of visualize that. But saying like, okay, you could become a software engineer if you've never programmed seems like still kind of crazy, but it's totally the same thing. It looks really difficult until you start, but once you've like, okay, I move my hands on the guitar and sound comes out, I just need to figure out how to do that really well, is like, you can kind of understand the context of how to learn further, but once you've started, but until you've started, you're like, it's just this magic thing that I could never do. And I think it's exactly the same for any other skill, you know, illustration, design, whatever. So let's build an app real quick. So we'll just start. How do I make an app? Cool. Halfway there, basically. All right, so we need Xcode. Let's do that. All right, how do I install Xcode? Giant link. Thanks, Google. All right. Now we'll install it, and we'll click on New Project. All right, we'll click Next in this confusing thing. All right, we'll type hello. Okay. Just like imagining you've never done this before, right? You already have Xcode on your computer, you're like way ahead of like 99% of people. So now you're here and we'll click on this thing. I've omitted the Googling for time, and we'll drag in a label and we'll type hello world. It's like the classic thing you do when you learn a new language. And then we'll click this play button. So we've gone from like never knowing anything, like how would you even begin to make something, to like sort of see how this works, and there's the iPhone simulator, and you've like made something, like that is an actual iPhone app running on your computer right now that you made in a handful of minutes, minus the time to download Xcode, because that's going to take some time. But now we can see like, okay, like there's probably some code involved here, I've heard of that. There's these files that end in .swift. What is that? So let's Google how to learn Swift. Cool. Okay, some paid courses we can watch. Apple's website, that sounds like a good place to start. Okay, it's a programming language, now I know, all right. Learn Swift on iPad, that sounds pretty good. Cool, and there's an app from Apple to learn Swift on an iPad, which I can personally say is fantastic. It is so good. It kind of feels like a game. My wife's not technical at all, and she did it and was like, this is fun, I want to keep playing this game. And it's like, you're secretly learning to program, you just don't know it. Like, it's really cool. Even like children do it in schools and stuff. But anyway, like we just went from, if you just imagine spending like a couple hours doing that, you went from I have no idea how I would ever make anything that I can like touch and interact with on my phone to like, I sort of see, I type in this box and stuff happens. Like just getting that initial context over whatever like thing you're trying to learn is really important. It takes it from, you know, these really smart people that I could never do to like, I could totally do this. Like, figure it out. Like, sure, it's going to take me some time. Just like, you know, you're not going to be great at guitar after a couple hours. Like, it's a lot of practice and just putting in the effort to learn what you need to learn. Similar for, you know, any skill. But I think it's really important to know that, like, I never like went to college or had formal training or did anything other than just like, I'm going to put in a bunch of effort and figure this out, because like, I figured out one thing, I can probably figure out this next thing. So let's start with something small. And I feel like this still sounds crazy, but I like fully believe that if you pick like, let's make a tea timer or like a tip calculator, like something really simple. With a handful of Saturdays, you could absolutely like make an app and put it in the store. It's really like not hard relative to like what you think it is. Like, absolutely, you can make an app in a handful of weekends, like, no doubt. So just pick something like insanely small. Like, what is the smallest possible thing I could do? Okay, I need a text field on the screen to get like the check amount, okay? How do I get a text field on the screen? Well, let's Google it and figure it out, like, okay. Just like working through it step by step, learning like very specific pieces of information is like all you have to do. Which is sort of like how I worked as like a 10-year-old learning the smallest possible thing you could learn, buying a book, learning the next thing, and so on. But I think focusing on one particular piece is really important, because if you try to learn how everything works, you'll never start. Even just getting like the smallest amount of information from one computer to another is like this insanely complicated, like you could spend your whole life trying to understand the details of that. It's like this really crazy amount of work between like just IP and TCP and TLS and like, oh my gosh, there's so much stuff. And you don't have to think about any of that really, you just need to focus on like the thing you're trying to do, because all of that stuff, like you can't hope to understand everything, and that's fine. I think originally that was tricky for me to just like, I want to read this whole book, like, cover to cover and learn all the things and then start, which is kind of like the classical like education way of doing things. But like that's a terrible way to approach like some vast topic. If you're trying to approach like some form of like writing literature or something, like maybe that's fine, but this is just so vast you can't hope to know everything, and that's okay. There's this other concept of encapsulation, which is like a bit of a technical word, but I think it's great. And I think of this in like everyday life, not just like programming, but if you imagine like a car is this really complicated thing. Like I'm not going to go home and like build a car. That's like insane. Like that would take years and years and years of like learning to know the things you'd need to know to make a car. But I know I can get in my car and I can push the gas and it goes forward, and that's cool. There's this like black box of magic that's doing all this stuff, and I don't have to really care about that. I can just like work on the inputs and I can see the outputs, and we're all good. It's the same sort of thing with learning a really complicated thing in programming. Like just like give me, like if you're making an app to show tweets or something, like just give me a tweet, and the thing gives you a tweet and you're like, cool, I got a tweet. How that works is like crazy, but you don't have to care, and that's okay. I think being into this concept can really help you get over some like initial barriers. So it's okay to not know things, because you can't know all the things, and that's totally fine. So I believe that you can do anything with enough time and effort. I didn't come from a family that could like afford to pay for college, or even have like a family friend like gave us a really cheap old computer. I never had any formal training. I didn't even really get good grades in high school. I just like tried really hard and was able to, make a bunch of stuff, which to me is this like amazing, like superpower thing, but it's really just a lot of effort and what it turns into. And I think it's like the best feeling ever to have an idea and be able to make it. And I want all of you to be able to do that if you're into it. So anyway, thanks for listening, and I'd love to take as many questions as we have time for.
Thanks so much for sharing, Sam. One of the things, if you follow Sam on Twitter, it's really quite a treat. Most recently, I'll share this story. You might even write a blog post about this later down the road, but Sam sent out this tweet. It's Soffes, S-O-F-F-E-S. And he's like, I'm looking for a job. I wanted to jump back into development. And if you go on there, there's like 175, something like crazy replies from like Facebook, Snap, like all these people just like send me your resume, send me your resume, send me your resume. And I say that all to say because it's a really inspiring story of like the small steps and your work ethic to just developing and keeping things going. Now you're getting to like seek the fruit of all that hard work. So I'm really excited for you. But one question I had, you provided a really great entry level into like how to get started. But now at the stage that you're at as a iOS developer, what are you doing to keep pushing forward? Or what are you doing to like continue to challenge yourself and get better? Especially for some who might be developers here or designers who are trying to get over that hump and take it to the next level.
Thank you. You're too kind. Yeah, it's the same sort of thing. I just like pick a thing that I don't know, and I'll try really hard and figure it out. So every day I'm searching Google and Stack Overflow and whatever to learn a new thing, because there's like an unlimited amount of things to learn, it seems. So yeah, I'll just, same thing, I just keep doing what I've been doing.
Yeah. What are questions might you have out here?
Any questions from anyone? You can just shout it out.
Yeah, shout it out. Everyone's like shy. All right, right here.
What do you learn that's not related to your work? What do you do to be the other part of your creation?
The question is, what do I do to learn creativity other than like programming? When I moved here in January, I bought a bunch of woodworking tools and like made all the furniture in my house. It's all really crappy. It sounds glamorous. So that's been really fun. Living in San Francisco, I don't really have an opportunity to like have a garage with tools, so that's been really cool. It's all plywood. It sounds glamorous. It's terrible.
So you kind of were talking about like creating apps, like something simple or whatever, but I feel like you go by what consumers look for in an app. Like, what do you think people need? Or like, how do you decide what kind of app you're going to make based on consumer, what you want, or just?
The question is, how do I decide what to make? Is it like consumer-based or just what I'm interested in? It kind of varies. A lot of my work as a freelancer has been like whatever the client wanted. And I've definitely told clients before, like, this is a bad idea, you're not going to make any money back, and they're like, oh, I want to do it. Like, cool, well, let's do it. My own projects, which make hardly any money, are just things I'm interested in, problems I have to solve. Yeah, I have this app called Redacted, and you can just like drag over an area and it pixelates it out, because it's way faster than like Photoshop or something for sharing a quick screenshot. Doesn't make any money, but I like working on it. So at least in my career, it's been way more profitable to like work for someone than it is to like make my own app. It's really hard to make a bunch of money on the App Store unless it's like winning the lottery. It's like you have to be very intentional and lucky to kind of hit it big.
Yeah. Other questions? Back there in the back.
Great question. Oh, geez. The question is, how do you deal with the fear of failure? Because that can be hard when you're starting. Yeah, that's definitely true. I think when I quit my first full-time job and started freelancing, that was pretty scary, because it's like, if I do this wrong, I'm going to be homeless. So, I mean, I can move in with my mom, I guess. Like, I don't know what I would do, which was scary. So it's like, I guess I have to try that much harder. And you know, things worked out. So, I don't know. I mean, I guess if it's like you think you want to make something and then you fail, I don't think you're really failing. You just haven't put in enough effort to get over that current like obstacle. I guess I don't ever really even think of it as like you could fail. You're just like you haven't like made it yet. Not to be like overly cliche, but I don't know, hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah.
The question is, have I ever built an app just for me, and what did it do? I built a few things. I built a thing a while back to keep track of like different burgers I liked. So stupid. It's called Sam's Burgers, and it's just a list of like ratings. It's really dumb. I was gonna like release it in like it'll be this great burger review site, and it was stupid. I don't know. I used to build a lot of like really small things when I was first starting, just because I was like building was exciting and I wanted to just build a bunch of things. I don't do that really anymore, because it used to be that's all I wanted to do was like sit and program. But now it's like I want to hang out with my family and travel and stuff, and I've kind of like done that. So if I'm going to make something, I want it to be really intentional and something I'm excited about that I think might have like either like a financial upside or whatever, you know, like exposure. So I try to keep it more intentional nowadays.
Do you recommend building apps that are free for download so you enable mobile display through hardware or for the download page without the app?
Good question. Should you build apps that are free with like in-app purchase or something, or just paid off the gate. I think it's proven that you do better to have free within some sort of feature that you unlock, like the freemium model. Definitely does better if you look at like the top apps, especially if you have something that's consumable, something you can like continue to buy. Like all of those, there's a bunch of games that do this. Like you have to keep buying gems or whatever, and they make so much money, like millions per day. It's crazy. Personally, I'm not into that sort of thing. So most of my apps are just a one-time fee, because it's more of like, hopefully this is valuable to you and you'll pay for it, and then like, cool, like I don't want any more money, which I guess is why all my apps don't make very much money.
Yeah, in the back.
Which app that I've worked on is the most downloaded? Of the things that I've built entirely, like on my own, probably Bible, most likely. Maybe not, because I only worked on it for like a year. So most of its growth is after I was there, just as like more people get phones and stuff. Kind of sells itself. It's not like I did anything special there. It's like it's the Bible, right? Like, so. It could have been terrible. I mean, it was terrible, and people still got it. I worked on this app called Lightly. There's this like photo editing app with the guy that designed all the Instagram filters. Really amazing photographer, Cole Rise. It was editor's choice when it came out, and that was like millions of downloads per day. The first week it was editor's choice. So I think in like a short amount of time, that's something I built entirely. That was probably the biggest thing. Great question. When you're learning something new, how do you keep yourself accountable to keep going? I think setting goals is another like really important thing. Like by the end of the month, I want to have like whatever done, and then like achieving that goal can feel like really great, or you know, can feel like disappointed in yourself. I'll often when I'm doing something, or I used to a lot, like I'd be very public about everything I'm doing. So like sharing on Twitter or to my friends or whatever, like. I'm making this thing and I want to have it done by this day, and then if you don't, like, all your friends will make you feel bad, and that feels bad. So like, I don't want to do that. I just want to finish it. I think like, I had the luxury when I was starting to be like this young kid that lived by himself in a city. He didn't know anyone, so I just like sat at home and programmed all day, which is not the case now. I have friends. So it can definitely be hard to like make time for it. I mean, I think it's just like if you were to like think about like learning an instrument or something, like you have to like be kind of just disciplined to like do it. There's really like no good way other than just like you make time for it and do it. I wish I had some like silver bullet for you. But.
So obviously SS Toolkit was something that was kind of really important to getting your name out there. So I think one of the most terrifying things of being a freelancer is marketing yourself, representing yourself in various spaces. I was just curious about like what different techniques you use to market yourself / your body for.
Great question. How do you market yourself as a freelancer? I've been very fortunate. When I started out doing Bible, there was like a handful of iOS engineers like in the world working on this, because it was so new and no one knew it was like a big deal yet. Like that's why it was just like a part-time thing at the church. So as I was tweeting about it and just being very open about everything I was working on, I got a lot of following pretty quickly. Just like someone working on like an iOS app was exciting to people. And then since then, the other stuff I've worked on has brought more like followers, I guess. But there was a time where I was like, I'm going to intentionally grow my network. So like I'm going to go be a guest on podcasts or like speak at events or whatever. And some of those was like I was super underqualified to be at. Like I definitely remember the first talk I gave is this like conference in Lexington. It was like totally shouldn't be here talking as like some 19-year-old. But anyway, being intentional about growing your network, however that works for you, has been for me very beneficial. all of my work comes from Twitter, like freelance or full-time or whatever. So yeah, I think just being intentional about it, like whatever that looks like, is the key there.
Maybe one more, right here.
You talked a lot about like kind of self-initiated education. Did you have any like mentorship along the way, and if so, how did you kind of like find that?
Great question. Did I have any mentors along the way? No, and I wish I did. Just due to like the nature of being the first like group of developers, there was never anyone that like was more senior or had more experience because I had like the maximum amount of experience. So a lot of it was just like at home by myself, like trying to figure it out, and that was at times very painful, especially like growing up in Kentucky and trying to learn like web development. At the time, I didn't know anyone in the state that did it, even like someone online I could follow. So it was just a lot of like at home fighting through problems, which can be definitely discouraging. And I think starting now is like an amazing time because there's lots of experienced people that are into mentoring people, and there's so many resources online. It's way easier now than it used to be, especially if you could like pay for some class like Udemy or Treehouse or something and like watch a video and like learn all the things you need to learn like in a pretty, one spot.
That's awesome. All right.
Let's give it up for Sam.